I got to the town because my car was already low on fuel and my phone was already low on battery, and because the highway split in a way that made my GPS hesitate, like it wasn't sure which version of the road it wanted to commit to. I'd been driving since before dawn for a short-term job, inventory checks and after-hours inspections for a chain that didn't pay well but paid fast, and the route had been simple on paper: in, out, one night in a motel, home the next day. The town on the map was called Aldermeet, and it looked like nothing. A dot with a name. No landmarks, no tourist symbols, no reason to stop. I stopped anyway because I needed something that wasn't a servo coffee, and because the sky had gone a flat, sickly gray that made the world feel like it was waiting for an update that never arrived. The first sign on the road into town wasn't a welcome sign. It was a plain sheet of metal bolted to two posts, white paint and black lettering. No logo, no council stamp. It said, "Close doors behind you." Underneath, in smaller letters that looked like someone had added them later, "Please." It was polite in the way warnings are polite when they've already been ignored too many times. Aldermeet looked like a town that had been cleaned, then forgotten. The streets were straight, the shop fronts tidy, the lawns trimmed. But there was a stillness in the air that wasn't about sleep. It was midday, and there were people around, walking, talking, buying groceries, but everyone moved with a kind of careful decisiveness, like their bodies had been trained to avoid hesitation. Doors were everywhere. Old timber doors, glass doors, steel back doors, double doors on community halls, and narrow doors on storage sheds, all of them painted and repainted over the years so the edges were soft with layers. I noticed almost immediately that no one left a door open, not even for convenience, not even to carry boxes. A mother pushing a pram through a cafe door pulled it shut behind her with her heel without looking back. A delivery driver dragging a hand truck through a stockroom door turned around and clicked the latch closed with a motion that looked automatic, like blinking. It wasn't fear. It was etiquette. It was the kind of etiquette you don't question because everyone else is doing it, and you don't want to be the person who makes a room go quiet. The motel was on the edge of town, and when I checked in, the woman behind the counter smiled at me like she was relieved I'd walked through the front door correctly. She slid my key across the counter and told me my room was around the back, and as she said it, her eyes flicked. Not to my face, not to the road behind me, but to the door at my shoulder, as if she needed to see it settle into place. "We keep things closed here," she said, and it sounded like a joke until I realized she wasn't laughing. I gave the safe answer, the one that costs nothing. "No worries," I said. She nodded as if I'd passed a small test. "Good," she replied, and then, after a pause, "If you're going into buildings tonight, don't double back. If you forget something, you can get it in the morning." I almost asked what she meant, but the words left my mouth as something else. "I'm just here for work," I said. Her smile tightened a fraction. "That's what everyone says the first day," she murmured, and then she looked down as if the conversation had ended on its own. My job that night was to visit 3 businesses, 1 supermarket, 1 hardware store, 1 medical clinic, and check a handful of things: fire exits unobstructed, backroom stock counted, a few serial numbers verified. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, the sort of work you do at night because it's cheaper than shutting down during the day. I'd done this dozens of times in dozens of towns, and the only rules I usually followed were common sense ones. Don't lock yourself out. Don't prop a fire door. Don't forget where you parked. But the key they gave me at the supermarket had a heavy tag attached that said, "Do not copy." And on the back of the tag, someone had written in marker, "Use front in, use side out." I assumed it was a manager's preference, flow control, security, whatever. And I didn't think about it until I was inside, and the door clicked shut behind me with a finality that felt a little too clean. The supermarket after hours was a different kind of quiet. Refrigeration hum, fluorescent lights that didn't quite buzz but felt like they wanted to, air conditioning cycling in slow breaths. I walked the aisles, checked the emergency exits, ticked boxes on my clipboard. At the back of the store, the stockroom door was propped open with a brick, and the sight of it made my stomach tighten for no logical reason. It wasn't my brick. It wasn't my store. It wasn't even against policy, technically, because the place was empty and I was inside. But I stepped over to it and pulled the door shut anyway. The latch caught with a soft click, and immediately the air felt less exposed, like I'd closed a gap my skin hadn't realized it was feeling. I stood there for a second, hand still on the handle, and told myself to stop being dramatic. Then I heard something that made me pause. A soft, shuffling noise from deeper in the stockroom, the kind of sound a pallet makes when you nudge it. I called out, "Hello," expecting maybe a cleaner or a night manager. No answer. I walked forward, flashlight in my hand, and the deeper I went, the more it felt like the building was smoothing itself behind me. Not changing, just settling, like doors were punctuation marks, and I was moving through a sentence that didn't like being interrupted. I finished the stock count and made my way back to the shop floor. The doorway I'd come through wasn't there. I don't mean it was hidden or I'd forgotten which wall it was on. I mean the wall was continuous, shelves stacked against it like they'd always been that way. For a long moment, I stood with my clipboard in my hands and tried to convince myself I was turned around, that I'd walked into the wrong corridor, that fatigue was doing something stupid to my sense of direction. So I walked back the way I'd come. Same shelves, same stacked boxes, same smell of cardboard and dust. No doorway. The building didn't feel wrong in a loud way. It felt wrong in a quiet, administrative way, like the store had decided my route was invalid and removed the option to argue. I felt my throat go dry. I took out my phone to turn on the torch and check the time. And for a second, the screen reflected the fluorescent lights above me in a way that made my eyes sting, because it looked like a door frame, a pale rectangle hovering where no doorway existed. Then the reflection corrected itself. I put my phone away and forced myself not to panic. Panic is hesitation. Hesitation is how you get stuck anywhere, not just here. A door appeared when I stopped looking for it. That was the first thing I learned about alder meat. If you hunt for certainty, the place responds by withholding it. The door was in the corner of the stockroom, half hidden behind a stack of empty crates. I was sure it hadn't been there before. Not because I'd memorized the room, but because the door had a small sticker on it, an old inventory label, glowing faintly under the lights like it wanted to be noticed. I walked to it slowly, listening for my own breath, and on the sticker someone had handwritten in pen, "Don't come back through this one." Underneath it, in smaller letters, "Please." The same polite pressure as the sign at the town entrance. I held the handle for a moment without turning it, I wasn't afraid of what was on the other side. I was afraid of choosing wrong. Then I remembered the motel woman's advice, don't double back, and I opened the door. The corridor beyond was narrow and unfamiliar, smelling faintly of disinfectant, as if it belonged to another building entirely. It should have led to the same back hallway I'd walked earlier, but it didn't. It led to a service passage I hadn't seen, with a line of gray doors along one wall like a row of sealed mouths. At the far end was an exit sign glowing green. I walked toward it quickly because movement felt safer than thought. When I pushed through the exit door, I stepped out onto the side of the supermarket, exactly where the key tag said I should. Night air hit me like relief. The door shut behind me with a soft, final click. For a few seconds I stood there, staring at the brick wall and the dark car park, trying to make sense of the fact that the building had rerouted me without drama. Then my phone buzzed with a low battery warning, and the mundane interruption felt like a gift. I told myself I'd imagined the missing doorway. I told myself the stockroom was bigger than I'd realized. I told myself everything was fine. I went to the hardware store next. The hardware store had a side entrance that opened into a dim aisle of paint tins and cleaning supplies. There was a handwritten sign taped to the glass. Side and after 9 p.m., front out only. I paused, reading it, and on instinct, I glanced around the empty street to see if anyone else was watching. No one was. The streetlights were steady. The town looked normal. So I pushed the door open and walked in. The smell of timber and metal hit me, familiar and comforting. The store felt like a store. But I noticed something else immediately. Small chalk marks on the floor near certain doors, as if someone had drawn a line and then wiped it away repeatedly. Some marks were fresh, some were old ghosts. There were arrows, too, subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking, pointing away from certain doorways. None of it was in my work instructions, but my eyes kept snagging on it, the way your eyes snag on a wet floor sign even when you're not going to slip. I did my checks quickly. The longer I stayed inside, the more it felt like the building wanted me to choose an exit and commit. I found myself moving with a purpose I hadn't decided on, walking in straight lines, avoiding the temptation to wander. At the back of the store, there was a door marked "Staff Only," and beside it, a small printed label like the ones used for shelves. Someone had repurposed it and typed, "Exit only after midnight." It was only 10:30. Still, my hands felt cold. I didn't touch that door. I finished my list and headed toward the front entrance, like the sign instructed, and just before I reached it, I heard something behind me. A door latch clicking, soft and deliberate, like someone closing a book. I turned my head without thinking. Down the staff hallway, the door I'd come through, the side entrance, was shutting itself. Not slamming, just closing smoothly, as if guided. I stared at it, and I felt the same pressure behind my eyes, the same subtle insistence that had pushed me forward in the supermarket. The door clicked shut, and in that instant the hardware store felt smaller, like it had removed a possibility and expected me to accept the new boundary. I didn't run, I just walked faster. I pushed through the front doors and stood on the footpath, breathing hard, pretending I'd simply been eager to finish. A car passed, slow, and the driver didn't look at me. The town wasn't reacting. The town wasn't warning me. The town was functioning as usual, which was worse. I began to understand that Aldermeat's rules weren't there to protect me from something. They were there to keep the town coherent. Doors were how it managed itself. Doors were how it prevented loops. By the time I reached the medical clinic, I had stopped thinking of the rules as signs. I started thinking of them as the town's habits. The clinic's entry was a glass door with a keypad. The code worked. The door opened. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paper. The hallway was long and white, with multiple doors along both sides, consulting rooms, storage closets, a staff kitchen. Each door had a tiny sticker near the hinge, a colored dot, a number, sometimes a symbol. It wasn't a system I understood, but I could feel it was one. The building wanted me to move in a pattern. I checked my list. Fire exits clear, cabinet sealed, equipment serial numbers. Simple. Yet I moved through the clinic like I was walking a maze I didn't trust. I found myself counting doors without realizing it. Not steps, but choices. Each time I opened one, I felt like I was spending something. Halfway down the hall, I found a door that was slightly ajar. A thin slice of darkness behind it. There was no label on this one. No dot. No number. The gap looked wrong, like someone had left a mouth open in a town that prided itself on closed things. I hesitated. The pressure behind my eyes sharpened. I told myself I was being stupid. I told myself it was just a closet someone forgot. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was not a room. It was a narrow passage with another door at the end, and the air inside smelled like damp wood, which didn't belong in a clinic. I stepped in anyway, 1 foot over the threshold, and immediately the door behind me eased shut. Not slamming, not trapped, just closed, like punctuation. At the far end of the passage, the second door had a small sign taped to it, handwritten in the same style as the motel's tone. If you open this, you keep going. Underneath, do not come back. My breath sounded too loud in the tight space. I reached for the handle, and in that moment, I understood what had been happening all night. The town didn't like indecision. It didn't like loops. It didn't like you returning through the same threshold as if you could prove something. If you tried to test it, it responded by committing the world around you. It resolved your choices for you. It wasn't malicious. It was efficient. I opened the second door. The passage led out into a corridor that was dimmer than the clinic's, lit by older, warmer lights. For a second, I thought I'd stepped into the motel hallway because the carpet pattern looked familiar. Then I realized it wasn't familiar. It was generic. It was the kind of carpet every building has when it doesn't want you to remember it. I walked forward, and another door appeared at the end. This one with a bright green exit sign above it. I pushed through, and I was outside, standing behind the clinic near a row of bins, exactly where a staff exit would logically be. The air smelled like wet leaves. The sky had deepened to a darker gray. A small part of me wanted to laugh from relief, but the larger part felt something heavier, understanding. The clinic had just rerouted me the way the supermarket had. It hadn't done it to scare me. It had done it because I'd introduced hesitation by opening an unlabeled door. I should have left town that night. That would have been the smart move. But the truth is, I didn't feel like I could trust leaving either. Not after my work had already carried me through 3 buildings that behaved like they shared a nervous system. I drove back to the motel and parked under the dim light outside my room. When I stepped inside, the first thing I did without thinking was close the door carefully and check the latch twice. The second thing I did was stand still and listen. Silence. No footsteps, no radio hiss, nothing overt. Just the hum of the motel fridge and the soft, distant sound of traffic. The room felt normal, too normal, like the town was giving me a chance to forget. I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time, and I realized I'd been doing something all night without naming it. I'd been keeping my route in my head. Not as a map, but as a sequence. In through this, out through that. Don't go back, don't repeat, keep moving forward. The town didn't require you to be perfect. It required you to be decisive. I didn't sleep much. When I did, I dreamt of doors opening into doors, opening into doors, each one narrowing the world a little further until the only safe movement was forward. I woke before sunrise with my heart racing and the taste of disinfectant in my mouth. My first thought was that I'd leave at first light and never come back. My second thought was that I still had another day of checks scheduled, another set of keys, another set of buildings, another paycheck I needed. And that's how Aldermeet keeps people. Not with walls, with practicality, with the kind of life pressure that makes you accept odd rules as long as they keep you functional. During the day, Aldermeet looked almost friendly. People waved at each other. Shops opened. Doors swung and shut and swung again. But even in daylight, I started seeing patterns I hadn't noticed before. People never held doors for strangers, not out of rudeness, but out of caution, like sharing a threshold at the wrong moment could tangle you. In the cafe, staff never carried trays through the same door customers used. In the post office, there were two doors side by side, one labeled Enter, one labeled Exit, even though both led to the same small room. In the library, every internal door had a small plaque beside it, not a sign with rules, just reminders of direction, as if direction mattered more than destination. And in the older parts of town, on the walls near some doors, you could see faint chalk marks like the ones in the hardware store, rubbed away and redrawn over and over, attempts to make invisible rules visible enough to follow. That night, back inside another building, I made my first real mistake, not by going somewhere forbidden, but by trying to confirm something. I was in a small office space doing a quick check, and I left a pen on a desk in the back room. I walked out into the hallway, reached the door to the front office, then stopped and turned around to go back for it. The moment I turned, I felt the pressure behind my eyes sharpen like a warning. The hallway seemed slightly longer. The door I'd just used didn't look wrong, just less certain, like the frame had lost its authority. I walked back anyway. I pushed the door open. The back room was there, but the desk was against a different wall. The window looked out onto a different angle of street. The pen was not on the desk. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to decide if this was a prank or a trick of exhaustion, and that was when I heard it. A quiet sound, not footsteps, not a voice, but the soft click of a latch behind me. The door I'd come through eased shut. I turned and put my hand on it immediately, and the handle felt warmer than it should have, like it had been held recently. I pulled. It opened, but not into the hallway I'd left. It opened into a narrow stairwell I hadn't seen before, lit by a single buzzing bulb, smelling faintly of damp concrete. I stood there and realized something that made my stomach drop. Aldermeet didn't punish you for breaking rules. It resolved you. It took your hesitation and turned it into a new route. The town was not trying to kill anyone. It was trying to prevent loops. People didn't vanish because something dragged them away. People vanished because they insisted on going back, insisted on confirming, insisted on doing the normal human thing of retracing steps to make reality behave. And in Aldermeet, retracing wasn't a path. It was friction. Friction created delays. Delays invited stillness. Stillness was where you became misplaced. I went down the stairwell slowly because I didn't want to introduce panic into a place that seemed to interpret emotion as indecision. At the bottom was a door with no label. I opened it, and I was in a corridor behind the office building, near the bins, exactly like the clinic's staff exit. The night air hit me, and I almost cried from relief. But relief didn't last. I looked back at the door, and for a second, I had the strongest urge to test it, to see if it would lead back inside, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. The urge was so intense it felt like thirst. That's what the town does. It makes certainty feel like a need. I stepped away from the door. I kept moving. I did not go back. I understood then that the safest rule in Aldermeet was not written on any sign. Do not seek confirmation. After a few days, the rules became habits. I stopped leaving things behind because the cost of retrieving them felt too high. I started choosing exits the moment I entered a building, committing in my head like a route plan. In through this, out through that, keep going forward, never reverse. I began to notice that doors weren't just barriers. They were decisions made physical. Every threshold asked the same question. Are you sure? And the moment you answered, the world adjusted around that answer as if it had been waiting. I started seeing people who didn't make it out cleanly, not as corpses, not as missing posters, not as screams in the night, just as absences that still occupied space. A man in the motel hallway who always stood near the ice machine, staring at the door to the laundry room, hand hovering near the handle, never turning it, never leaving. A woman in the supermarket who pushed her trolley in slow circles near the back aisle, eyes fixed on the stockroom door as if she'd forgotten which direction she was allowed to go. They didn't look distressed. They looked paused, like their lives were stuck between choices. And the most horrifying part was that no one intervened. People stepped around them with the same careful courtesy they used around puddles, not looking too directly, not acknowledging too firmly, as if attention itself was a kind of invitation. I asked the motel woman about the man by the ice machine one morning, keeping my tone light. She glanced at him without turning her head fully, then looked back at me. He's fine, she said. He's just sorting himself out. I waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. How long has he been like that? I asked. She shrugged in a way that felt practiced. Long enough, she said. He'll move when he knows where he's going. Then she added softly, Don't talk to him. You'll make it harder. The way she said it made my skin prickle. Not because it was cruel, because it was practical. Like the town had taught them that some people are better left unresolved than pushed into the wrong door. The last night I worked in Aldermeet, I was tired enough that the rules felt heavier. Tiredness makes you sloppy. Sloppy makes you hesitate. I was finishing a final check in a community hall, a big open space with stacked chairs and a small stage, and I found myself standing in the middle of it, unsure which door I'd entered through. There were 3 exits, one to the street, one to a kitchen, one to a storage corridor. All of them looked normal. All of them could have been right. My hands went cold. Pressure built behind my eyes, subtle and insistent, like the town could smell indecision on me. I forced myself to choose the street door. I walked to it and pushed it open, and for a split second, I saw something that made my heart seize. A corridor beyond it, not the outside, narrow and dim and lined with doors. Then the image corrected itself, and it was the street, the night air, the world behaving. I stepped out fast and pulled the door shut behind me with shaking hands. The latch clicked. The air eased. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a warning. The town had offered me a wrong door, the way a body offers you the urge to scratch a wound. It wanted to see if I'd do it. I drove out of Aldermeet before midnight. I didn't stop to buy fuel. I didn't stop to eat. I kept moving as if motion itself was protective. The highway stretched out and the GPS stopped hesitating. The sky opened into a clean darkness full of indifferent stars. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe without listening for a latch. When I finally stopped at a servo 2 towns over, I walked into the bathroom and locked the door behind me, then realized my hand had done it without thinking. I washed my face, stared at myself in the mirror, and tried to laugh at the whole thing. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was the power of suggestion. Maybe I'd been primed by one sign, and everything else had been my brain pattern matching to justify fear. I almost believed it, right up until I walked back out and reached for the main door to leave. There were 2 doors side by side on the servo, one marked entry, one marked exit. I hadn't noticed them when I came in. Both were glass. Both led to the same forecourt. I stood there for just a second too long, trying to remember which one I'd used. In that second, the pressure behind my eyes returned, faint but unmistakable, like a hand on the back of my skull guiding me forward. I swallowed and chose the exit door. I pushed it open, and for the briefest moment, the door opened into something else. A narrow corridor, dim, lined with doors. The same generic carpet, the same smell of damp wood that didn't belong. My heart kicked hard. I didn't step through. I pulled the door shut immediately, hands trembling, and the glass showed the forecourt again like nothing had happened. I stood there breathing shallowly, understanding with sick clarity that the rules weren't just Aldermeet's rules. They were the shape Aldermeet had trained into me. Doors hadn't become dangerous. My hesitation had. I left through the other door without thinking, because thinking was the problem. Outside, the night air felt colder. The cars on the highway sounded too far away. I got into my car and sat there for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the servo entrance like it might open incorrectly if I looked away. Then I did what Aldermeet had taught me to do. I chose a direction. I committed. I started the engine and drove. Because the worst thing you can do, once you've learned what doors are capable of, is stand still in front of one and ask it to prove where it leads.